Utah for the second straight year falls in the Rose Bowl, this time to Penn State. But the biggest question being asked right now, was that Cam Rising's last game in a Utes uniform? Let's go.
Locked On Pac-12, your daily podcast on the Pac-12 Conference. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On Pac-12. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your number one source to stay up to date with our beloved Conference of Champions. Please continue to like, comment, subscribe wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is shared with me by my man, JT Wistrcill of Locked On Utes. Smiling through the pain, I hope, over there after another Rose Bowl defeat for Utah. You can catch him on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. JT, how are you holding up? Have you kept the alcohol drinking at a minimum?
I can't say about the other students who I sat next to at the game yesterday, but I sure tried to. That was tough, Spencer. Just felt like this was Utah's year. I felt like last year, as everyone said, last year, lucky to be there. Awesome. Outstanding performance against a team that you were supposed to lose to anyways in Ohio State. Like it's going to be great for Utah coming back. Penn State, we got it. And just
not so much.
Cam's injury, all of that, just really disappointing final outing for what was ended up being kind of a crazy and special Utah team that repeated as back-to-back Pac-12 champs.
Which is still a great thing. However, the question that people have on their minds right now, JT, was that disappointing game that did not go as planned, especially when you consider Cam Rising left the game with an injury again and didn't get to finish the Rose Bowl, which is a bummer and a half. Was that his last game as a Ute?
I could build up a bunch of suspense, but I'm just going to come out and say it was not his last game as a Ute, in my opinion. And I feel very strong in saying that. Let's do a time jump back, because I think people might be surprised if they've listened to me or just follow this whole situation or follow your show too, have followed this situation. This was supposed to be Cam's final game. I think to start the season, he envisioned his final game being a Rose Bowl or a college football playoff game. Obviously, that was out the window a while ago. Josh Furlong of KSL.com, I want to give him a shout out because he's very key in this story to me. He asked him in a post-game press conference, Cam, against Stanford, Utah's final home game of the season, final game at Rice-Eccles, do you believe this is your last game at Rice-Eccles? He said, I believe it is. And that's how the press conference ended. Everyone got up and left. Everyone started going nuts on social media, losing their minds that, hey, this is it. This is Cam's final game. No, I have not heard this from anyone. I really believe the Oregon game really changed things. I felt like any draft stock Cam had left, whether that was a day 3 guy, which has felt like what he was still kind of trying to cling and hold on to after some very up and down performances, to put it mildly, early on.
Totally agree.
Second half against Oregon, I felt like that just sunk it. Just a devastating performance for Cam in terms of draft stock. I felt like it plummeted. So there wasn't really any option for him in terms of, I didn't feel like he's going to get drafted. So that's an undrafted free agent. Now, fast forward to leading up to the Rose Bowl, Utah repeats as back-to-back Pac-12 champions. There's obviously a lot of excitement around the program and everything going on there. And then all of a sudden you start to hear these whispers and rumors. I had Josh once again Furlong on my show last week. He told me that he doesn't now think anymore that Cam is going to go. He thinks Cam is coming back. Talked with other people who are just around in the media circle who think Cam is going to come back. I talked to someone yesterday who said they had spoken to Cam's dad, and they told me that he was going to come back, then that they said Cam was coming back there too. So that's where it's like, it's a bunch of he said, she said, basically. But I'll also throw in this of why I think he's coming back, because I mentioned the biggest thing for me was the Oregon game. With the way the college landscape has changed, I think NIL money really impacts and change things. I believe Cam Rising can make more money as a quarterback staying at Utah than he can going on to play in the NFL, because he's going to be an undrafted free agent. I forget what the undrafted salary is. It's not even $1 million. I think there's a chance he could exceed.
It's a couple $100K.
Exactly. And I think he can well exceed that staying at Utah. So it's a better financial gain. You're going to actually play and start next year in meaningful games. And the other huge thing, I think that was the nail in the coffin of him staying. As I mentioned, I haven't spoken to Cam specifically. This is all just what I'm hearing in different things that I'm relaying to you guys. I think the injury really just finalized everything, because you are not getting drafted by some NFL team. Well, he's not getting drafted. You're not getting even signed by some NFL team with an injury. We don't know Still hasn't been released exactly what the injury is, how long the timeline is out for. Witt never discloses these kind of things. I think it's going to be a lengthy one. I don't think if Utah had a game next week, I don't think Cam's playing in it, obviously, if he came out in street clothes from the previous one. So he's going to miss a lot of time. He's not going to be able to do anything if he would have tried to go to the Senior Bowl or any of those kind of things. Who knows if he would have gotten an invite because of his lack of those strong performances. So I think that was the final nail in the coffin. He's going to come back to Utah. He's going to rehab. He's going to make more money, in my opinion, just based on how the NIL cycle is working. Not you're the quarterback who's been with the team for a couple seasons. So I look at all that and look forward to the future. And I really think that Cameron is going to be the starter next year. And the final nail in that coffin was his injury. He will stay at Utah and rehab it.
Well, that'd certainly be the best situation for Utah, though they have some promising players in that quarterback room as they look to the future. Anytime you have a guy of Cam's caliber who's, a reigning from 2021 first-team All-Pac-12 performer and has led your team to back-to-back conference championships and Rose Bowl appearances, that's a guy you'd rather have than not. I'm with you on the draft stock thing for sure, because I don't think his draft stock is that high to begin with. He is big enough. He's mobile enough. I think he processes defenses well enough. His arm talent is not high level. I don't think he has a top 5 arm in the Pac-12.
I agree with that.
I think Caleb Williams is above him. Bo Nix is above him. Now DJU is above him. Michael Penix is above him. Cam Ward is above him. Tanner McKee is above him. DTR this year. And you look at guys. Sure. Yeah. It doesn't mean he's not one of the better quarterbacks, but when you're talking about the NFL, they're looking for traits. His mobility, that's an NFL caliber trait for sure. But I think you even compare him to a guy like Tyler Huntley. Huntley's got a better arm. Cam is a better college player. But, I think that's a component of it as well. So, with that being said, I'm leaning on you here. That's why I brought you on the show. I think it would make a lot of sense for him to come back. I think that's the best case situation for Utah. And, just really, really fast, JT, not just the injury, but also the loss. Right? There is that feeling that players chase of riding off into the sunset. I mean, that had to play a factor. That has to be playing a factor too. I shouldn't say had, because this is not a final situation yet, but that has to factor into it as well, right? To get to that game and come up short again, like leaving with a bad taste in your mouth and an injury, I have to feel like that's going to, start to pile up the factors as to why he would return.
I absolutely agree. I think it just adds to the motivation of, you've taken this Utah team. Last year, you took them to a height they hadn't reached before and came short in the Rose Bowl. You had an opportunity to take them to a new height once again with the Rose Bowl championship, and you can't get it done. And in both of those instances, you weren't in control at the end of the games because you were sitting and watching on the sidelines. I think Cam is the ultimate competitor. We talk about how many Utah fans last year viewed the Rose Bowl loss as a win. Cam sure didn't. You could tell he was still mad about it in spring ball. That's just the kind of competitor he is. He wants to be out there. Wants to be able to make those plays for his guys too. And I can tell, you can just feel like it's just, it's unfinished business. It really is, in terms of, yes, winning Pac-12 championships is great, but I mean, all Utah has to do, and it's hard to be one of the 12 best teams in college football. We're going to learn that a lot next year, but all Utah has to do is reach the same height in terms of their record on a season, and they can reach a new height in terms of being welcomed into the postseason play of the first ever college football tournament. I think that's very enticing to Cam in this group. And I'll also say, there's a lot of rumors about these other guys floating around. Is Devon Vele coming back? Is Brant Keithy coming back? Is Mekhi Bernard? Is RJ Hubert? All those tides seem to kind of be shifting where those guys seem gone, and now it seems like they may be coming back. It's a loaded Pac-12 conference next year. I know we're going to talk about that later, Spencer, but with the Utes having this many returners, I think they're going to be in a good position to still make some noise in the conference, because they're going to have guys back who have reached the mountaintop in terms of Pac-12 conference play.
Yeah, the conference is stacked like a deck of cards, man, with storylines, great teams, and outstanding players, particularly at the quarterback position. Unfortunately, that was, again, a revolving door for the Utes in this Rose Bowl game. Why exactly did it all go wrong against Penn State? Well, I wouldn't have bet that it would have gone that way, because we both thought it was going to go in a different direction. Utah was favored, according to our friends at BetOnline, your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season and everything in between. We've got it all at betonline.net. If you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting information. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline is where the game starts. Worthy of note, they did eventually flip Penn State to being a slight favorite, but the line never really wavered bigger than 3, and Penn State ultimately controlled the game. So let's get into that game. It's easy to look at how it played out and say, well, no Cam Rising, that didn't that did him in, right? And I watched most of that game, JT. Even if Cam Rising had been there, it looked like Penn State was just the better football team.
I agree. And I said that on my show too. I felt like that if Cam had played, it's a much more competitive game. I feel like it ends 28-35 and not, I mean, that game honestly was more like a 35-14. Utah scored that late kind of garbage time touchdown to make it a little closer than it was. I feel like the Utes are in this game all the way. I never want to completely count Utah and Cam out. I mean, they were down 17-3 in the Pac-12 championship and raced the deficit like that. So I think there's a chance they could have come back and won the game. But based on what we were seeing, the Utah defense really struggled in the second half. I mean, you can't give up 2 touchdowns of over 85 yards on third down, pinned deep in their own territory too. Penn State was, and win games. And that's really what happened there. Penn State had one good late drive too to help finish things off. And, late they kind of just shifted into running the ball too. So who knows what other damage they could have piled on at the end. If let's say Cam got in there and look, Utah was marching when Cam got hurt. So maybe they are able to score, but I will also add, just being fair and honest, Utah had also put together other drives that reached midfield and then stalled with Cam at the helm at quarterback. So it's no guarantee with him in there that they would have gone touchdown after touchdown after touchdown against the best defense they honestly played all season long. I thought Penn State was phenomenal, even without Joey Porter Jr. Their secondary was lights out. The Utes receivers really struggled to create separation. Devon made some big plays, but I mean, even his 50-yarder, the corner's with him all the way. In fact, Devon just was adjusted to the ball better at the last second. He came back and made the play. It was just a bad job by that corner locating the ball, but he was there in coverage all the way. Dalton Kincaid's absence was really felt in this one too. And yeah, it just feels like even if Utah did play, especially because of those defensive issues, one thing Utah had so much success against USC is because Caleb Williams was hurt, and then they're just blitzing and throwing the house and using all these different pressures. Penn State, even without their top tackle prospect who decided to come back for another year in Fasciano, they were outstanding up front. They held the Utes to 3 sacks, but overall it just felt like a lot of those big third down plays when Utah needed to get home. Utah actually converted more third downs in this game, which just watching the game live, I wasn't looking at the stats all game. I was just there as a NPC, whatever you want to call it. I just totally blanked on it. Basically, someone watching the bleachers. Anyways, that it really felt like Penn State converted those downs when they needed to most, whether that was after midfield in their own territory. They made those plays because the Utes defense, whether that was no Clark Phillips in the secondary, and I think you sometimes take a guy like that for granted because he does just erase half the field a lot of times, and you can just do so many things off him, knowing like, what's Clark doing? Well, he's shutting someone down. That's what you know is going to happen. Utah didn't have that. Some of their linebacker deficiencies on the season. RJ Hubert brought up the coverage bust that led to the 80-yard touchdown pass. The touchdown run was a well-done job by the Penn State coaching staff. They faked a check to the sideline. And
yeah, that was sharp. I saw that all happen. And I was like, man, that's some high level stuff. And that takes a tremendous level of coaching and timing and execution and attention to detail for that team to be able to pull that off. James Franklin's a really good football coach, right? It's not like Utah got punked here by some scrub team with a scrub coaching staff, and it was just, it wasn't
holds like every Penn State quarterback record. I know he gets maligned a lot, but he's still, that's a really good program. He did a lot of good things there, and he was pretty good yesterday.
Yeah, he did. And is Penn State at Michigan and Ohio State's level? No, clearly they are not. However, do you know how many teams in the country are? Because when you look at the next cadre of teams that are kind of outside the playoff looking in and clearly aren't there, it is a top 10 team, and I think they proved that. Still, it's really disappointing. I mean, that is a disappointing performance from Utah. And no Kincaid, no Clark Phillips. That also leaves you asking, what if? Cam Rising's injury, sure, but they played without him for part of the game. And they won a game at Washington State this year, which is not an easy place to win with Bryson Barnes at quarterback. But how much of an impact do you think those 2 opt-outs played in this one?
I mean, they were huge. I mean, I think about the big drop that Thomas Yasmin had in this one right before the half, where it feels like momentum's totally different if you get that big play. And look, when Cam was under duress sometimes, I think instead of tucking and running some of those, he's given Dalton a chance, because Dalton's a guy who, I mean, look, he might not always create separation, but even when he's covered, in a lot of ways, you go up there and give him a chance because he's just that kind of a playmaker who comes down and comes away with those kind of catches. Cam didn't have his guy out there. And I talked about a lot last week how I felt like in some ways that might help because he has to distribute the ball and spread it around. But this was against a really good secondary where it's like, oh, there's nowhere to spread the ball because no one's getting open. So it would kind of help to have your guy who's just leads your team in receiving yards for a reason. Then Clark on the other side. I mentioned him a little bit. I just think defensively, you could have just used your shutdown corner because it allows you to do so many things on the other side. One of the leaders of this defense, one of the leaders of this team in their best players on the season. So it was a tough blow for the Utes.
Yeah, it certainly was. And, you know, your Wi-Fi's taken a couple tough blows in the midst of this show, but it's nothing too detrimental, thankfully, at this point in time. But let's get to what happens next for Utah, because I thought they just got outplayed in that game, whereas they played Ohio State evenly a year ago. This one, Penn State was just a better football team. And I think that's disappointing for Utah because it almost feels like after you repeated as conference champs, it was a step back in the Grandaddy of Them All. It was not as good of a performance, and still that aspect of their trophy case remains unfilled. But going forward now, let's say Cam Rising does come back. What's next for the Utes?
I mentioned a couple of those other guys that they hope come back, and Brant Keithy, Devon Vele. I think Mekhi Bernard, like if he comes back, great. If not, I mean, how about Jaquindon Jackson in that touchdown run? I mean, I can't even tell you how excited I am for that guy with a full offseason.
He's good.
By the next time we see him, still adjusting to playing the running back position, gets so much work is going to be so important for him in the offseason. I think he's just going to explode and take off next season. We know what Brant could mean. If you lose Dalton, you might as well get the other guy back who is going to be part of the best tight end duo in the nation. So I think that'll be huge for this Utah team. They got some big transfers coming in from programs like Stanford, Ole Miss, the recruiting class. I expect a couple of those guys to still contribute early on. I think that's the encouraging thing about this Utah football team is in a lot of ways, their future is bright because of how strong those recruits are. Those guys with that higher ceiling and that potential to be able to take Utah to the next level. But it's going to be tough next year. The conference is really good. It's loaded with talented teams. I think for the Utes, they need to get some guys healthy, right? Van Fillinger and Jonah Ellis were this team's two best defensive ends. Overall, I feel like Gabe Reed was a better pass rusher this season than Van Fillinger, but those were their two best defensive ends, Van Fillinger and Jonah Ellis, and they didn't play in this game, so they need to get them back and healthy, and maybe need to add another veteran pass rusher. I think could really help this team, because you're also losing Diabate, who ended up leading this team in sacks and forced a big fumble on Caleb Williams, something that no one has been able to do all season long. He's not going to be in there. And I think also I got to shift to the offensive side. I've mentioned a lot of guys. Look, Braden Daniels has just been a stalwart on this offensive line. He's a 4-year starter, and he was the left tackle. He was outstanding, first team all conference. He's not going to be there next year. And look, Satao Laumea was named first team right tackle. I felt like that one was Satao is a very good player. I didn't know if he was worthy of the first team selection, as much as I don't want to crap on one of my guys. I think Satao is very good, but I don't have faith in a guy who's playing his first year at tackle to just make the switch to left tackle, another switch to the outside. I think it's going to be a lot. So look, it's hard to find elite offensive linemen in the transfer portal, so that'll be challenging. And look, the transfer portal is also drying up, so that's where it's going to be tough for this team to add. The other thing they could really use is an elite wide receiver on the outside.
One thing that's always very important to remember with the transfer portal, though, this initial window is still open until January 18th, and then it will close, but then it will reopen again in the spring. So there will be another opportunity, and there will be another wave of guys who will go through spring practice or have conversations with coaches about where they stand on the depth chart, and then decide whether or not that particular program is still the best place for them to be. So while I agree with you, it's not as hot on the transfer portal front as it was, say, 2 weeks ago, right, in the middle of December, there is still an opportunity, I think, for the Utes to dip their toe in the water on that front when the spring cycle comes around. You do still have another National Signing Day coming up in February. Of course, they got Spencer Fano, 4-star offensive tackle that Oregon and Michigan were going after and heavily in the running for. usually tough for offensive linemen to play as a true freshman, but having those sorts of bodies there certainly helps. Another thing I want to ask you about Utah, JT. As you look to a loaded Pac-12 in 2023, and I mean just stacked like tiramisu, that's you and me right there. Not that I don't love a good cheeseburger, I absolutely crave a double from In-N-Out as we're talking about all of this sort of stuff, but I also enjoy a well-made tiramisu. That tells you a little bit about me. That's enough food talk for now. I could give you an hour podcast. I could do
we could give you a 2-hour food podcast.
We could give you a daily 2-hour food podcast if you would like. But we're here for football. And as you look at what's coming in the Pac-12 next year, Caleb Williams and Lincoln Riley are at USC. Chip Kelly's bringing in Dante Moore or a transfer quarterback from Penn State. One of them will start. And he's got things rolling there in a good way. Washington has the nation's leading passer back, and their offensive coordinator's back. Oregon has Bo Nix back, and is doing very well in recruiting and in the transfer portal front. Oregon State just added DJ Uiagalelei. Do you see where Colorado... I didn't even mention Coach Prime. I haven't even thrown that wild card that Utah plays every year into the mix. Who knows what that's going to be? I set all this up to ask you, in lieu of where the program is at right now, what the mood is after this game, what are Utah's prospects for 2023?
I mean, I think the expectation will still be to once again go back to back as Pac-12 conference champions. But as you just highlighted, Spencer, it's a lot tougher this coming year because it felt like the one challenge to Utah was USC. And people didn't know what to expect from Oregon. I think Oregon really came on strong too. I should have loped Oregon in there too, but it felt like coming into the season, there were 3 teams with the chance to win a Pac-12 championship. I think Vegas ended up favoring USC just because of the glitz and the glamour, but a lot of people thought USC was going to be overrated. And look, they finished the season kind of.
They overperformed. They overperformed in my view. I thought they would go 9-3 and win their bowl game to get to 10-3, and they end the year at 11-3.
Yeah.
Not the way I thought it would specifically go down, but still, they overperformed in year 1.
For sure. But now another year with Lincoln Riley, another year of Caleb Williams too. You mentioned the quarterbacks in this conference. I mean, it's not the best year to be losing a guy who's going to be a first-round pick at defensive back and potentially a starting safety as well. If Hubert ends up going and not having – I think Jonah Ellis is a good pass rusher. He is not this elite pass rusher who's going to constantly get after the quarterback. That was the weakness of this Utah defense a lot of the season. Hey, they weren't able to get pressure with force. So it's going to be hard. They have some tough games next year too. Talk about at Washington. That was one thing Utah kind of was able to duck this past season was the Huskies. And with Michael Penix coming back, the things he's able to do. You get Oregon at home, but look, Oregon is, they're the kind of team they can beat you anywhere. So that's where it's going to be interesting to see how the Ducks handle
I don't know. Last time Oregon went to Salt Lake City, I've still got PTSD. So I'll take the Utes in that one.
That's fair. I'm going back to Oregon State during the Utes' first Pac-12 championship season. That was their only loss. I'll even loop in another one. They're not going to win the conference, but you want to talk about a game I could look at and be like, if you're telling me Utah loses it, I'd be surprised, but I'm not like, there's no way they're losing that. At Arizona. I know it sounds crazy, but
love it. Love it. Absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. Arizona took such a big step this year. If they can add a few pieces on defense, get their X's and O's a little bit better. Losing Dorian Singer to USC hurts a little on offense, but you still got Delora, you still got T-Mac, you got running backs. I like Jed Fish as a play caller. They know what they're doing there.
Why can't they get the upset?
And by the way, Arizona pulled a big upset this year that no one, myself included, saw coming. They're a 20-point road underdog to UCLA, and they walk out of there as the victors. I think that is a great point. Arizona is one of the most interesting teams to me because in all this conference shuffling that we're talking about here in the contenders, you look at teams with situations that I've spoken highly of here on this show. Washington State with Jake Dickert. Are they going to take a step back? Seems like they could be poised for it. Arizona, are they going to take a step forward? They could be poised. But what is that step forward? Is that just getting to 6-6 and bowl eligibility? Or is that going 8-4 and beating one of those teams in the upper echelon as they did this year, but winning more of those other conference games as well? I'm intrigued in that front. But I think for Utah, they are certainly a team that can contend for a conference championship next year. The schedule is brutal. Brutal, brutal because
Florida and Baylor.
Yeah, Florida and Baylor in the non-conference. You do have Oregon at home, but you got to go at Oregon State, where they've lost once in the last 2 years. You got to go at Washington. You got to go at USC, and you also have to play UCLA. Like it's arguably the toughest
and Colorado's
conference
be better
schedule.
too.
Colorado's not going to be a doormat anymore.
Yep.
Because just by virtue of they've added a lot of talent already and will continue to add more. So I think that makes this loss almost sting a little bit more for the Utes when you look at what's coming next year. Because look, if Cam Rising and Kyle Whittingham are there and players like Jaquindon Jackson and Brant Keithy comes back, yes, they are still capable of being a quiet contender as they have been for the last couple of years in this conference. But the road is just tough. It's really, really tough, and they're losing some really good players from this year's team. And I look at that and say, man, that makes not pulling out one of those Rose Bowls even tougher, because getting to it this year, good luck to anybody who wants to do that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think you look at last year's, it was like, oh, we can come back. We can make it back to the Rose Bowl because of the success. Like, oh, against Ohio State, we're the clear favorites. We have all our best players pretty much returning outside of Devin Lloyd, of course, and Britton Covey. But that's where it was like, oh, we'll be able to get back to this point. And you did. You got back to it, and you lost. And that sucks, because it's going to be really hard to get back next year. And I think there were a lot of people already talking about Utah taking a step back next year with obviously Cam's departure. And now it's even if Cam stays, it's just like, and this team's going to be very good in a lot of ways. They could even be better by some ways. I think it's going to be hard to replace guys like Clark, as I mentioned, but look at so many young players on the defensive side that just another year of experience for them that you think they should be stronger to. 4 of the 5 stars along the offensive line are staying, and they should be staying in the same position as well, I might add. But the conference is so much better. And last year there were all those games. Like, obviously,
I mean, it was really good. It was really good this year, and you can so easily make the case.
Well, Stanford and Arizona games
It'll
like
be
that.
better.
Like, that was so easy. Predicting games to be like, yep, they're winning that. Yep, they're winning that. Like, you don't, like we already mentioned, Arizona's a potential upset. Like, what if Utah has an outstanding season, everything's going right, and then all of a sudden Coach Prime, who's had a disappointing season, comes in with like 3 wins and somehow rallies the troops to beat Utah for the first time at Rice-Eccles Stadium since the Utah haven't lost since 2019.
Hold the phone. Go ask a Colorado fan and let me know which of them would say 3 wins going into the Utah game would be a disappointing season. And I will show you a Colorado fan whose expectations are a little bit high. I think the over-under for Colorado's wins next year is set around like 5.5. If they got to 4 or 5, victory,
yes, for sure.
quite literally, you'd be quadrupling your wins from this year. That'd be good in year one. But yeah, I can't wait. I mean, it's a bummer that we have to wait many hundreds of days for another
242 days as of the recording. By the time y'all are listening to this, it's 241.
We do have spring games, though. I love a good spring game. We'll certainly talk about those here on the show, because they give you a nice peek into, behind the curtain sort of stuff about like, so that guy's good, and just thinking back to last year, one guy who we talked about here on the show with me and my guy Carter Baines and I discussed, was one of the players who earned playing time after Oregon State's spring game was Damian Martinez, also known as the Pac-12 Offensive Freshman of the Year. So they can be a great window, but it is still tough that it'll be a couple hundred days. But JT and I will be there regardless, with everything that you need and all the other guests we bring here on the show. And full disclosure, JT, you are one of my favorites. Don't tell everybody else. Hopefully they're not watching or listening to this one. But
I've heard in the last 2 days, especially check my comment section.
That's not... Well, I'm going to go check that after this, because I love some good entertainment and whatnot. But thanks for taking the time after the tough loss for the Utes. Appreciate it, man.
Always great talking with you, Spencer. Thanks for having me on.
Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time, and that'll be tomorrow. Have a wonderful rest of your day.